Aloha and welcome to Inside the Writers Studio, presented by the Hawaii Writers Guild. I'm your host, Eila Algood, and I am excited today to bring a guest all the way from Oahu. Don Kennedy is an author and a writer, and he will be sharing part of a story that he has written, and then we will follow that up with some talk story to get to know him as a writer and an author. Welcome, Don.
Aloha, Isla. How are you today? I'm Don Kennedy. I live on the island of Oahu, and I live in a valley called Makaha Valley. It's on the far west end on the Waianae coast. So I live right at the base of Mount Kahala, and we've got peacocks and roosters and everybody roaming free. So if you hear some of those noises, that's just my animal ohana that is visiting. So I'm going to be reading two items today. I've written two books. They're both called "Kids Say the Darndest Things to Santa Claus," and the first one that I'm going to read is from volume 2, which was published the end of 2020. And this is all about my very first time being Santa Claus. 25 years ago, in early December, a close friend of mine had shared with me that he was a volunteer Santa. He made appearances at various holiday parties for charities and organizations that did not have the funds to actually rent a Santa. He had suggested for some time that I should dress up as an elf and join him. I finally stopped making excuses and agreed to join in. The night before my very first elf adventure, at a major Boys and Girls Club children's party in Las Vegas, he came down with a bad virus. He suggested that I go in his place instead. Very skeptical at first, as you can imagine. I had 100 questions, but finally I agreed, took his Santa duffel bag, and off I went. He offered a backup suit, but I declined. What on earth could happen, right? About 100 children ages 4 to 8 were gathered at the Boys and Girls Club Center draped with festive holiday decor. A dozen staff volunteers and several dozen parents were present as well. There were refreshments and small gifts for all the kids. Santa had a head elf and two Santa's helpers. Sitting on a large stuffed chair with a Christmas tree on one side and wrapped gifts on the other, Santa looked on as the children all sang holiday songs for about 15 minutes. Then each of the various age groups performed a skit that they had written with their staff members. It was really precious. Santa jumped in a few times to sing and dance along with the children. Since it was totally impromptu, the kids really loved it. Wow, this is a lot of fun, I thought to myself. Then the announcement was made for the children to line up single file and approach Santa. The head elf introduced each child to me by their first name. I then asked each child their age and had them hold up the appropriate number of their fingers to show their age, something I still do to this day. Then I matched each finger with mine, which kind of created a little special high 5 or high 4 or high 3, whatever it happened to be. Santa then asked each child what their wishes were for Christmas, followed by a photo and giving each of the kids a large candy cane. Each child also received a small gift. So far, so good, I remember thinking, this really isn't that hard. The next child came up, a 6-year-old boy who replied when I asked what his wishes were, "Well, I wrote you a letter, don't you remember?" Thinking fast, I told him that Mrs. Claus took care of all of the letters. Okay, that worked. The next little boy marched up proudly to Santa when it was his turn and said, "Mommy says I's impossible. What's that get me?" A dozen kids later, and I had my first accident when a very excited little boy erped all over Santa's leg. That was when I recalled my friend offering that second Santa suit. Santa needs a backup suit at all appearances, for sure. The best I could do in this case was take a short break, clean up the best I could, and go back at it. A tiny bit of panic was starting to creep in. A few kids later, a little girl came up, stared at Santa, and blurted out, "You better start drinking skim milk or 2% milk because you look really fat." Her mother was horrified, but I told her that Mrs. Claus had me on a new diet. She seemed satisfied with that. A boy 7 years old came up, folded his arms in front of his chest, and declared, "I hope you do better than last year." Next up was a girl who announced that she was going to get married in a couple of weeks and have twins. Her dad looked on with amazement because she was just 6. Another little boy was really amusing himself by trying to tell me his favorite joke until he totally forgot the punchline. Another little guy blurted out, "My grandpa says I's a work in process, so go easy on me." So, being puked on aside, this was becoming heartwarmingly fun. Donning the Santa suit taught me several things, but mainly that you need to be quick on your feet and ready for just about anything. You need to listen very carefully and not promise the world. I was also in total wonder at these amazing little characters, how their minds work and what they had to say. I also learned that what a child hears, they do repeat. That was borne out by a little boy starting to tell Santa what his daddy said in the car on the way to the party about all of the other drivers. His dad stopped him just in the nick of time. On went the night, about 3 hours in all. As I walked through the center to the office to change, about a dozen kids waited at the front door, peering out. I wondered what that was all about. Turns out they were waiting to see Santa make his exit, plus see the sleigh and all of the reindeers. That explained why my Santa friend told me to carefully disappear from the party when all of the children had been seen and get changed into your civvies. I left quietly and inconspicuously out to the car. Instead of just driving home, I sat back for a bit and I collected myself. For some reason, I'll never know, I pulled out a pen and a notepad and wrote down about a dozen notes of what some of the kids had said to me. On the drive home, I realized that this was one of the most meaningful days of my life. The next day, I returned the Santa suit to my friend, washed, and told him about my experience. He was most happy that his prediction that I would be a good Santa was correct. And as they say, the rest is history.
I wanted to first tell you that I find the topic so interesting as someone who's never played Santa Claus. The idea that you're kind of hearing all these different things from these children, it seems very rich and powerful.
Yes, it's I've never had children of my own, and so the opportunity to be with hundreds and hundreds of kids every Christmas kind of fulfills a special part in me, and I think that's why it went from a one-time gig to a passion.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and thank you for reading that and for writing it. And you have a whole book of your experiences, is that right?
Yes, we've all heard about the proverbial shoe boxes. So I collected 25 years worth of, turned out to be 2,100 scraps of paper in the proverbial shoe boxes. And when I finally decided to write a book, I spent, all I can tell you is a long, long time going through all of these different stories and sorting out what I thought were the very best. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for sharing that. I don't know that anyone has that I've interviewed has come at it from that angle where they were just like collecting stories and throwing them in a box like that. And I think it's valuable for people who are watching who may think about writing to know, or maybe they're involved in writing, just to hear another way of going through that process, like what you did. Um, at what point did you decide or think, I want to write a book?
What happened was every year after some of my visits, I mean, some years I did 30, 40 Santas. One year was 72 Santas. And it sounds like a lot more than it really is, but you can do 3 or 4 shelters in an evening. So it's not really as many as it sounds like. But I would tell my coworkers about it. I would tell my family about it. Finally, about 4 or 5 years before I actually decided to write the book, I started putting out a top 10 list of my favorite funny stories and a top 10 list of the most heartwarming stories. And I put that on my Facebook page, usually the first or second week of January. And I kept getting these comments from my friends and family on Facebook that said, you really need to write a book. You really need to write a book. And of course, I dismissed that for years, going, of course, I mean, who just wakes up one day and decides to write a book? And that's what happened. I got tired of reading all of these Facebook comments, and I said, okay, let me see if I can actually pull this off.
Mhm.
And that's when I got, it turned out to be 14 shoe boxes out of the closet. And that almost stopped me right there. But that's what drove me to do it, was the comments, people saying, you have a story to tell and the world needs to hear it. I can remember one of my family members saying that to me. And that's what brought it about.
That's wonderful advice to give every human on the planet, because everyone has a story to tell. And your story has come through as when you were doing Santa Claus and all the experiences you had, that I imagine you picked very carefully the ones that you felt were somehow the most valuable, the most meaningful, maybe some funny stories. How did you pick, actually? What was your criteria for doing that?
Yeah, it was a very difficult process, Ala. From about, like I say, about 2,100 stories is what I counted it up eventually. I whittled it down to 500. I just kind of picked a number and said, okay, that's going to be the number. And initially, I was just going to put all funny stories
Mhm.
because there were enough of those among the 2,000. But then, as I sat down and started writing, which took me a long time to figure out the format of it. And I finally decided to put it into chapters of the locations.
Mhm.
So, like women's and children's shelters,
Mhm.
uh, hospitals, community center, churches, schools, because the locations seem to add something to the stories.
Mhm.
And so as I was writing, I think I wrote the very first chapter, which was military families. I realized that some of the most meaningful stories were not funny.
Mhm. Mhm.
I had a little boy and a girl that came up to me. They were like 6 and 7, and it was at an Air Force base. And they gave me a letter, and they asked me when I was flying near heaven if I could stop and deliver the letter to their dad. And what had happened,
Uh,
excuse me, what had happened is their mom had told me, she told me then that he had passed from combat injuries in Iraq.
mhm.
And so I told the kids that I would deliver the letter. And then the little girl turned back around and she said, "It's okay if Jesus reads it too." So
Uh,
that's definitely not a funny story, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
I had to include it. So that's when my whole book changed from just all funny stories to whatever was there, that's what I wrote. So there might be in a chapter, there might be 6 funny stories and 6 heartwarming stories.
yeah, yeah. Wow. Well, it sounds like quite the undertaking. And I wonder, had you done writing before you embarked on this voyage?
Most of my writing in the past has been was like with newspapers and things like that. So this was a very different thing for me.
Okay, so this was much more close to your heart, and it was experiential, but it sounds like maybe you were writing articles before for papers.
Yeah, I didn't realize it, but once it was published, people told me that I was writing from my heart.
Yeah.
And I think what probably made that happen or brought it about was, which I had never pictured when I decided to write the book, was I'm not writing about a character, or I'm not writing about a situation or something in life. I am actually part of the characters that I'm writing about.
Mhm.
So I think that changed my whole perspective on it as well.
Mhm.
Not only was I writing about the children, and I was writing about their moms and dads and grandparents that were there with them, but I was also writing about myself. And so I think that might have added to the the more heartfelt that came through.
Yeah. Yeah. And tell us the name of the book.
I think you cut out on me there.
Okay, the name, just say the name of the book again.
The name of the book is Kids Say the Darndest Things to Santa Claus.
Well, I do remember a television program when I was younger. I'm thinking
Yes,
maybe the 60s. Kids say the darndest thing.
yes.
Was that David Linkletter?
Art Linkletter.
Art Linkletter. There you go.
Yes, he
Oh,
was the host. And just to show you I'm not a professional writer, uh, I actually had to research whether I could use the name
mm,
just for that very
I
reason. Art
wondered. Yeah,
Linkletter
yeah, yeah,
wrote like 3 or 4 of those books, and it turns out that because a lot of the words in the title are ordinary words, there wasn't a copyright on it.
Oh, well,
So
that's
that's why
good.
I was able to go
Yeah.
ahead and use it.
Yeah, I love the title. It's besides being familiar to me, it's also very catchy. It's like it definitely grabs your attention. Was this something that you published on your own, or did you go through a publishing company?
I did it with Book Baby, a publishing company,
Yeah.
and it was that was another whole experience. You know,
Yes.
I over the years I've told. I mean, this has only been 2 years since I've been writing, and I've encouraged, number one, anybody to write, to go ahead and do it.
Mhm.
Uh, my nephew has written 3 books. His pen name is Keith J.K. And what he told me early on, which was a phrase, I guess a pretty well-known phrase, was writers write and waiters wait. And he said, just kind of like Nike's slogan, just do it. But the other thing was, what I encourage people is get it published.
Mhm.
You know, even if it's something small and it's something short. The first book was 100 pages. The second book was 140 pages.
Mhm.
Just do it.
Just do it, and I think it's important not to do it for the money. You're doing it because you have a story or a message or poetry, whatever it is that you're publishing. You have your own voice, right? And getting that out there so people can read it. Um, it's not easy to market it and to sell millions of copies, but you can get the word out there. And I know some people they'll offer their book for a week special. You can get it on Kindle for free. And it just to stir up some interest and get people reading it, because it sounds like your book is, a really interesting, unique voice that you have. So,
Well, what you said earlier, Isla, is very, very true. And that is that everybody has a story to tell.
mm.
And so I totally agree with that. And I think it's important that everybody writes their story.
I totally agree. I think that's a good place for us to complete our show today. Are there any last comments you'd like to put out there to people about being a writer, getting the writing done, anything?
I think it's important if you can find a writers group. The Hawaii Writers Guild is a wonderful group of just a total collection of people from all walks of life and different ways of writing. So I encourage people to seek out other writers that can help you. Like I say, I'm not a professional author. I didn't even call myself an author until somebody told me that an author is just a writer that gets published. So I just encourage people to find an organization wherever they live that can help them with their craft, and just do it.
Just do it. That's a great way to conclude our time together. I want to thank you very much, Don, for taking the time and the energy to do this, to be on the show, to share your story, a little bit of your book, Kids Say the Darndest Things to Santa Claus by Don Kennedy. And for people who are watching, want to know more, you can go to the website, hawaiiwritersguild.com, and also like us on Facebook. There's a Hawaii Writers Guild Facebook page. Aloha all, until next time.
Ahui ho.